overheat with the sun just shining on them and so on? What about if you went to the airport to take your friend for a flight and then you forgot your GPS at home? What about if, even better, and I've done that, you have the GPS in the plane, except it's in the luggage compartment? And even during IFR flying, which is for instrument flying, like in the cloud, you can see on the right-hand side here, you have some mini dead reckoning legs where, for example, departing the Watsonville Airport on the runway that is 21, you would be just departing on a heading here until 1,000 feet, then making a left turn before joining a radial. So even in this case, it is also used by pilots in the cloud just to get from one point to another. So it's basically a very important way to navigate. But there are more reasons just to learn to fly by dead reckoning. You might have the luck just to fly an older airplane. These are 3 airplanes that I got a chance to fly. On the top right is the 1947 Piper Cub that I flew in France. On the bottom right is the Thunder Chicken. That's an Aeroncar from 1946 that was flying in the Bay Area for a long time. And on the bottom left is a Stearman from 1942. Neither of these airplanes have an electrical system. So your best way to navigate is to use a compass and a watch, or maybe a portable GPS if you have one readily available. Now, the principles, as I explained in the beginning, are fairly simple. Google provides the same kind of information when you are driving from point A to point B. Here is an example of what Google Maps gives you if you want to drive from the San Carlos Airport to the Little River Airport. We can see as we depart San Carlos Airport, we know our current location, and Google gives us some directions saying, go northwest on Airport Way for 276 feet, and then continue on Airport Way for 0.2 miles. When you are at the intersection of Airport Way and Holly Street, it tells you just to make a left turn and go for 430 feet, and so on and so on and so on. So basically knowing where you are, which direction to go, and how much distance you have to cover, this is how you can navigate with dead reckoning or deduced navigation. Now, how does that apply with flying? Well, here is an example of a flight plan that could be possible from San Carlos to the Little River Airport. We could create each of the legs one at a time and find out what is their distance and their direction. The heading is, here is the direction, and the distance is right here. So the San Carlos Airport being on the bottom right where the mouse is, we would go 2 miles on this heading here just to find our first turns. And then from here, we would turn left. And that would give us a new heading of 232 degrees for 4 nautical miles. And that should bring us to this little dot here. Then we make a further left turn to a heading of 199 for 2 miles, and so on and so on and so on. Now, while flying, it is interesting, we don't have actually ground measurement distance like in a car, where we can count the rotations of the wheels. So what we have to do is, based on our airspeed, calculate how much time we have to fly for this leg. So what does that give us here? If I want to fly for 2 miles at 60 knots, it would take me 2 minutes to do that leg. So from my takeoff time until 2 minutes, I should be on heading of 304. Then if I accelerate to 90 knots for a 4 nautical mile leg, it would take me 2 minutes and 40 seconds for this particular leg. Now added to the leg above, it would take me 4 minutes and 40 seconds from my takeoff time, and so on. After about 10 minutes, 9 minutes and 10 seconds precisely, I should be over the Half Moon Bay Airport. And from there, I would be right here after 9 minutes and 10 seconds. And from there, I can continue my legs and proceed to the Little River Airport. Now let's try to understand how we calculate time versus distance. One of the things to understand is what is a knot. A knot is a nautical mile per hour. So you know your distance, 1 nautical mile that you would cover in 1 hour if you were to fly at 1 knot. So here is an example that is realistic for flying airplanes. If I am flying at 60 knots, I would be covering 60 nautical miles in 1 hour, which is exactly the same thing as covering 60 nautical miles in 60 minutes. Or I am covering 1 mile for every single minute. The same thing, as you saw in the example, my second speed would be 90 knots, which is basically nautical miles in 60 minutes, which now leads me to cover 1.5 nautical miles every 1 minute. And as I would be in cruise, in the 172, for example, you would be flying close to 100 nautical miles in 1 hour, so 120 knots, which is basically 2 nautical miles in 1 minute. So let's zoom in onto the flight from San Carlos to the Half Moon Bay Airport. Well, as we discussed, the legs would be 2 minutes, 2 nautical miles, 4 nautical miles, 2 nautical miles, 3 nautical miles, and 4 nautical miles. And my speed is changing here, as I would be accelerating until I reach my cruise speed of 120 knots. Now I can deduce the leg time for each of those legs, and then add them up from my takeoff time, so that I know when to make my turns. And then here I have my heading, so that I know where I'm going. Now, with that in mind, I should be in 9 minutes and 10 seconds, if I did my planning right over the Half Moon Bay Airport. Now the question is, does that really work? Now the good news is that you have flight simulators that you can use, and for today we're going to use Microsoft Flight Simulator just to see if this works. That should put us right over the Half Moon Bay Airport. The interesting part of this presentation is that until a few days ago, I was wondering on how to demonstrate these skills. Because if you can see outside, you can cheat your way out. Well, guess what? The weather around here is such that we are in a heavy fog. So the simulator here actually picked up the weather, which has a visibility of 1 mile. This would definitely not be legal to fly in a visual condition. Yet, because this is a flight simulator, we can give our best chance at it and see if we can reach the Half Moon Bay Airport. So let's get right into it. The first thing, and I will be using a cell phone for that, is to have a clock. That is very important. As I apply power, I will start my clock and start having the airplane rolling. Now the plane is gently accelerating on the runway, and I will be climbing, as we said by the logbook, on the runway heading for 2 minutes. So here I'm reaching 60 knots. I'm going to rotate and gently climb here on that heading. Let's see where we can get here. I'm a little fast. All right, we are climbing at about 70 knots right now, so a little fast. I'm going to try to slow down a tiny bit to be more accurate with my prediction speed. Now, the interesting thing here is because the visibility outside is about 1 mile, is that you can see why you would never want to fly in this weather in visual condition. You have no idea where you're going. Yet it is a great exercise here with the flight simulator, just to see if we can find Half Moon Bay just like that by using the compass that you can see located here at the bottom. That's a directional gyro, or here on the top, and the clock, which is actually in my hands here. So now we are reaching 1 minute and 22 seconds. And I'm going to level off at 1,500 feet, which you see right here, or try to. So we're coming up on 1 minute and 45 seconds. And here we are with just about 2 minutes. So I'm going to start my turn to my next heading, which is 232 degrees. And fly there until 4 minutes and 40 seconds. And I need to do that at 90 knots. Otherwise, I would be way too far forward if I was going too fast. So it is important while flying just to maintain the planned speed Otherwise, you would be way too far forward in your flight plan if you were going too fast. That would put you in a lot of trouble. So let's see here. Ahead of us, in theory, we should see the Crystal Spring Reservoir. For most of you, you have seen it on Highway 280 when you drive from San Jose to San Francisco, or the other way around, but on the west-end side of the Highway 280. Well, we can see that with 1 mile of visibility, there is no way to find that reservoir. Let's see, we are just about 3 minutes from departure. Time to finish my climb checklist. My fuel is on both, my flaps are up, my power is set, so I'm good to go here. I just need to correct for my altitude a little bit. And we should now be close to the Crystal Spring Reservoir. Interestingly, I cannot see it at all. It is 3 minutes and 40 seconds, so we have 1 more minute to go. I need to correct my heading a little bit. All right, I'm still going to the right a little too much. We're at 4 minutes and 10 seconds here. Oh, I can guess the Crystal Spring Reservoir right here on the right, so I can't be too far. I'm a little too low and a little bit to the left of my course, I guess, based on my heading. Here is my 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I'm supposed to turn a heading of 200. So that will be a left turn to this heading here and fly that for 1 minute and accelerating at 120 knots.
Climb, Bruno.
Yeah, mountains are here.
Terrain.
That is correct. All right, we're getting up to 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So in 20 seconds, I will start a slight right turn to get to Highway 1, which is the highway following the Pacific Coast Ocean. Here's the time for my turn. I move the back to my heading of 235. Maybe not enough. Somewhere here. And it's important that I keep my speed also as close to 120 as possible. Otherwise, I may not end up in the right location.
Is there some reason you're not climbing, or is it just you
it
want to
was
stay where you are?
I want to stay where I am right now on purpose. I will explain that in a minute. All right, we are 40 seconds from our turn. Let's see, that's so in theory here, we should see the Pacific Ocean straight ahead of us. Obviously, with 1 mile visibility like today, we are not seeing anything. And that is okay for this experiment here. All right, 10 seconds from our turn, and we're gonna turn to our final heading of 296 degrees and fly that for 2 minutes. All right.
Unusual attitude.
Exactly. All right.
Small corrections.
So with that said, now the question is, in front of us, we should see Half Moon Bay. So we'll see in about 1 minute and 30 seconds if we can find Half Moon Bay Airport. The interest here of this demonstration is based on what you learn when you go scuba dive. Most of the instructors, what they have you do is put a towel over your head. They put you in a field, they give you a compass, and they have you navigate to some mark by giving you heading and distance to demonstrate to you that it works. Now, scuba diving, you're not moving very fast. In fact, it's extremely slow. So you're not covering that much ground. Yet, with airplanes, are you covering a lot more ground? It is very hard to demonstrate that this technique works without looking outside, because this would be unsafe to do in a real airplane with this visibility. But it remains still a very accurate way of navigation. If everything goes well, in about 20 seconds from now, I will pause the simulator and we will actually clear the weather. That is the beauty of the flight simulator. We can remove the smoke in a matter of seconds and compare what is our actual location with our expected location. So we are about 10 seconds to go. Oh, sorry, 5 seconds to go. And I'm going to pause the simulator right here. From here, I don't know if I can even tell by looking outside where I am. Not just like that. But the beauty is that we can clear the weather and see how this works. I'm going to go straight outside of the airplane, peek outside, and wow, well, this is the best I've ever done. If you look here, right underneath the airplane is actually the Half Moon Bay Airport. The shadow is right on the left-hand side of the runway. So it shows you that even after a 10-minute flight, you are pretty damn accurate just to fly by just referring to a compass and a watch if you have done proper planning. Now, in the meantime, what I have been doing is using another simulator, and that's why at some point you saw me correcting a little abruptly, just to show what the path would look like along the way as I fly to Little River. I didn't want to bore everybody just flying to Little River. And currently that airplane here just passed Point Reyes. So Point Reyes here is right on the left-hand side here, and it's continuing to just to navigate like this. Now in this case, I am cheating to relieve me from some work. I'm using the autopilot to maintain my heading and my speed. So we'll see if by the end of this presentation, we are able just to reach Little River. Now the demonstration that I did is only accurate because I was low to the ground and the winds today are very small. There is almost no winds today. However, in real life, that may not happen. There are two types of errors that you have to correct while flying an airplane. The first one is airspeed. Well, airplanes don't measure airspeed, as it turns out. What they measure is ram air pressure. It's basically the same thing as putting your hand out through the window of the car while driving and feeling the pressure on your hand to guess your how fast the car is moving. This actually turns out to be pretty accurate, except for one thing. Pressure of the air changes with temperature and altitude. Now, for about $12, you can find on Amazon one of those E6Bs. This is a Jeppesen one that is made of cardboard. That has a little window here on the right-hand side that allows you just to correct for altitude and temperature and figure out from your indicated airspeed what is your actual true airspeed. Now, if you don't have one of these, you can simplify by correcting the error of airspeed by 2% for every 1,000 feet. That's just a simplification if you don't have one readily available. So for example, at 10,000 feet, you'll be flying roughly 20% faster than your indicated airspeed. Now, the other thing that affects a lot this type of flying are the effects of the wind and the wind speed. If you are flying, for example, straight north at 120 knots, and you have a wind coming at 300 degrees at 20 knots, well, it turns out that what the plane is really flying is that blue line here. You're flying on a heading of 8 degrees and under 9 knots. Now, this is important just to notice that, because while you are flying this, after about an hour of flight time, you will be roughly 3.5 miles to the right of your course and about 10 miles or 11 miles behind compared with your expected location. That is quite a lot. And you want to avoid that. But knowing the winds, you can actually compensate for that by using, again, that fantastic E6B here. The backhand side that is not on the picture allows you just to correct for winds. And basically, knowing the winds that you have here, you can modify that triangle and now fly 8 degrees to the left at 120 knots. The wheel will keep pushing me in this direction. And in real life, I will find that I'm flying on the right heading that I wanted at a speed of 109 knots compared with the ground. So basically now there is only one error I have to compensate, is the error of my speed. Instead of being expected to be here, I will be here. And I can compensate for that by calculating my time to fix my time while flying. Now, on a long distance flight, you want to account for all these. In today's flight, I picked the winds of today, and as it turns out, the winds are very light. You can see the speeds are all less than 5 knots. The higher speed is closer to Little River at about 5 knots. So what it means is that my heading, whether I account for the wind or not, is barely changing. You can see on takeoff, instead of 304 that we used in the first demonstration, ideally I should have picked 303. Instead of 232, well, it's exactly 232 here, and so on. And here is 1 degree that you find here. My time, however, because of the true airspeed and the wind, changes a little bit. And you can see that for the first leg, well, ideally I would have waited an extra 3 seconds. But at the end, you can see that the time makes quite a bit of difference. Instead of 72 minutes and 40 seconds, I would arrive at 70 minutes and 14 seconds. So that's almost 1 minute and 30 seconds off, which at 120 miles an hour or 120 knots is almost 3 nautical miles off my path. So where are we now? Well, since the flight started, the plane has been moving, and I have been flying for 35 minutes at this point in the second simulator that I showed you. So let's go right back to it. After about 35 minutes, I was expecting to arrive over Bodega Bay. And here I am. Here is Bodega Bay that you can see here on the left-hand side. So I'm slightly to the left of my course, and I'm about a minute behind in this simulator here. So I will be able to correct and then readjust for that as I get closer, and then continue on with my flight. Interestingly, Bodega Bay is quite far away from San Carlos. It is roughly 50 miles away, 70 miles away from San Carlos. And you can see that I'm off by a very short distance compared with my expectations. I will correct for those since I can see, and then resume my flight to Little River. Now, I'm using today flight simulators, and there is something to distinguish between a flight simulator and a game. Here are 3 flight simulators that I'm familiar with. We use today the Microsoft Flight Simulator, which I believe has been the longest flight simulator in existence on PCs. There is also Infinite Flight, which is the one I've been using on iPad in this case, but it also works on an Android. And there is Explain. All those flight simulators here have built in those errors that you see in real life. And this is why I can use them for my navigation here. In contrast to that, a game like Google Earth will not give you the proper airspeed, will not give you proper heading, or altitude in some cases. So in this case, your navigation might be slightly off. Now, what can we do during this pandemic and during the heavy fog that we have in the area here to stay current with our skills? Well, one of them is to take some challenges on some flight simulator. You can go to your local flight school. Most of them have a flight simulator. You can use a flight simulator on your PC or even on your tablet, and then do some flights around. Here is one that I would challenge the young aviators here just to do. There are two islands in the Indian Ocean on the southern hemisphere, one on the bottom left called Reunion Island, and one on the top right called Mauritius Island. Those are separated by about 120 nautical miles, as you can see here. Well, what about you try to take off with a Cessna 172 from Saint Denis here, and then try to find your way with just a compass and a watch over ocean to the airport here in Mauritius Island. That should take you a little bit more than an hour, and you will see how accurately you can find that airport by just using a watch and a compass. Remember to think about the winds, remember to think about your headings, and just be patient, and you should be able to find it. For the student pilots and the pilots in the Bay Area, once the weather clears, I invite you just to fly from San Carlos to Paso Robles. This is a great flight to do. It's about the same distance as between Mauritius and Reunion Island. However, here it's all over land, a lot safer in case of an engine failure. Two things here. You have great landmarks along the way that you can use for your navigation. While arriving at the Paso Robles airport, with the current pandemic ongoing, you can still go to the south side of the airport and visit the museum there. They have a portion that is outside before flying back to San Carlos. Once you have trained on a few cross countries like this, you can really check how proficient you are. Right across the bay at the Hayward Airport, there is a proficiency rally that happens every year. Here, the goal is not speed, it is accuracy. How accurately can you fly from point A to point B to point C to point D? How accurate can you be in time? But that would be almost too easy. How accurate can you be with your fuel consumption? That is a real excitement. Most pilots end up to be on top of their points within 5 seconds these days. That is really amazing. And fuel after a 300 or 400 nautical miles flight, pilots end up to be at the most between 1 and 2 gallons off from their prediction. So this is how you can verify that you're proficient with your skills of dead reckoning. Now, I also invite you to continue your education with without necessarily flying. The FAA provides handbooks and manuals that you can find for free. On the right-hand side here, I put 2 pictures of 2 handbooks that I used to prepare this presentation. One is the Airplane Flying Handbook, and the other one is the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. If you want to learn more about navigation, in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, go to chapter 16. You will find a lot of detail about different ways of navigation, including dead reckoning. Also, this presentation here allows me just to give you wings credit. If you don't have an account yet, go on FAAsafety.gov and create an account using one email and one password that you will have to create. Please send me the email address that you are using into the chat box, and I will be able to give you credit for this presentation. This may be your first credit, your first wings credit. For those of you who are not familiar with the FAAsafety.gov website, you can also find additional courses in there, some of them free, some of them that you have to pay, that will give you credit towards your biannual flight review, for example, but also will help you improve your knowledge about aviation. And with all that said, I wanted to thank the EA20 Young Aviator Group for organizing this event. I hope that all student pilots here and all pilots here will be able to encourage the practice of the art of dead reckoning navigation. This is something that we seldomly do these days, as we all use GPS most likely. Now I am open for questions.
Yeah, so thank you, Bruno. It was fascinating to see how we can navigate an airplane without a GPS and low visibility. Now it's time for some Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat box. Also, if you haven't put your email in the chat, please do so now. So our first question is, so with wind, airspeed would turn to ground speed. Can you determine what airspeed corresponds to a given ground speed for each leg on the navlog?
That is a good question. I can estimate for my airspeed what will be my ground speed. That is the first step. So in the example that we used today, the visibility was very poor, to say the least. And basically, I would be able to tell from the winds and from the triangle that I showed you, roughly what would be my ground speed. In real life, once in flight, what I would be doing is have some waypoints on the ground where I know the distance between those two waypoints, and then clock the time that it takes me from one point to the second point, and confirm that my estimated ground speed matches my actual ground speed. If need be, I would correct for that.
Yeah. And what of the 3 flight simulators do you recommend to practice best?
Well, I guess the best are the ones that you find in your flight school. They not only because of the flight simulator, but because you would have a flight instructor that would be next to you, helping you gain proficiency with your flying. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy a good flight simulator at home and continue your education at home or practice and all that. Like today, I use those 2 flight simulators, Microsoft Flight Simulator and Infinite Flight. You can use anything that you like. I am not here just to advertise any specific flight simulator here. But those the flight simulator today, even the games like you find on your PC, are pretty good. I will admit that for instrument flying, before going for a flight, I will try to practice each of the approaches that I'm planning to fly in the flight simulator at home, so that by the time I get there, I am not surprised by something unknown. I may have some surprises, but at least I will have less surprises.
Okay. What made you sure you were going to clear the terrain west of Crystal Springs Reservoir?
What made me sure is that I was hoping that I was following my heading and my speed correctly. In this particular case, I picked 1,500 feet because I knew of the terrain is about 1,400 feet. Now, in real life, nobody would ever do that. But this was to demonstrate, similarly to what we do when you go scuba diving with your towel on your head, that it can be pretty damn precise if you do it right. Now, you'd better do it right, and it works pretty well. And that was an example of that.
Is Dead Reckoning a sufficient substitute for radio navigation? For example, IVORs.
Well, I would say they work best when you combine them together. If you cover long distance, VOR navigation or even GPS navigation is a lot easier to do, because now you don't have to monitor the ground all the time to see if you are drifting left or right. You see it straight onto your panel, whether you are drifting. However, what about if you were if you cover a long distance, for example, in the desert of Nevada and you're too low and you can't get access to the next VOR? Well, if you know that you started from a VOR, I don't know, south, for example, and the next VOR is further south, and you continue south, most likely you're going to get within range of the next VOR after a certain time. And knowing that allows you just to fly even when you don't have access to this flight. Without getting radio navigation.
Have you ever had a GPS failure on an actual flight?
Not that portable, yes. Portable, I had iPad overheating, or like I said, stupid things like leaving the GPS in the luggage compartment of the airplane, taking off, and then wondering where's the GPS and realizing that, oops, it's in the back, that you can't reach, but not on purpose. Not the instrument panel itself.
What if you're off track and you don't know where you are? What do you do in the fog?
Oh, that's a very good question. Going back to what happened to a friend of mine, is in a very serial number 3 of the Cessna 182 with a G1000 that had a complete electrical failure in IMC. you know roughly where you are. You don't necessarily have to know exactly where you are unless you are trying to do something like I did today to see how accurately you can be right over the airport of Half Moon Bay. So knowing roughly where you are, you can make a guess that you will fly climbing above this valley and then making a turn above that other valley and so on to avoid terrain. Once you get in the clear, now you can regroup, try to find out where you are precisely, and then resume your navigation a lot more accurately.
Why is it important to cross-check and verify multiple sources of data against each other?
Well, you have seen my first, on my first slide or second slide, I forgot, there was a notice to airmen that indicated that GPS was unreliable in a cone of airspace. Now, if you're flying only with your GPS, what you might find, and that on the other hand has happened to me, it's not a GPS failure based because of a NOTAM. The GPS all of a sudden told me that I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Well, if you were to fly that GPS at that point, it's going to get embarrassing. So looking outside if you fly in visual condition or using other instruments just to back up your GPS will allow you just to confirm really that you are not over the Atlantic Ocean. And I can tell you that looking down, I was definitely not over the Atlantic Ocean.
So Oliver and Kelly have had their GPSs and iPads fail. So hope you paid close attention. If there are any other questions, Oliver and Kelly, would you like to unmute? We would like to hear about those experiences.
Yeah, this is Kelly.
Yeah.
Do you have an echo?
A little bit.
Yeah. I'll be brief, but I was on my cross country and I was over by Yosemite in an area I'd never been in before. And my iPad failed as I was climbing out of my third airport because it was summer and it was about 105 degrees out there. And you suddenly realize you have no idea where you are because you haven't been looking out the window and you haven't been tracking yourself on a map. And I don't do that anymore. So I'm always looking out the window, even if my GPS is working, I'm looking at the window. I'm making little tick marks as I'm going along, just kind of out of habit now. Because when you have to suddenly recover from a GPS failure, you've got paper all over the place. And the cockpit workload, you're just not ready for it. So, all the time that was happening, I took my took my iPad out of its case, and I had the vent open down by my left leg, and as I was wrestling with the maps with one hand, and I was holding my iPad down against the vent to cool it off with my left hand. I was in a Citabria, so I was steering with my knees, and I was trying to fumble around with the map. And it's a little exciting. We'll just call it that. Eventually it came back, but not before I had to basically do a lot of dead reckoning.
How long did the iPad fail?
It was down for about 20 minutes.
And what's your backup plans now?
I always have paper backup. I always have it, and I keep the map in the seat next to me, and I track where I am, and I try to consistently look out for landmarks to double check where I think I am, and I just assume that my GPS will fail.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience. Oliver, could you share your experience of the Garmin 430 failing?
Yes, I was back east actually, and the weather was not great. And Kelly's exactly right. It gets a little exciting when it fails. But this was a 430, and suddenly I had a big red X over the map. And fortunately, I looked down to my left, and there was an airport there, so I was getting flight following. I told ATC, "Hey, I'm gonna land over here," and that's what I did. But it was some kind of a motherboard mismatch. I don't remember exactly what, went to the FBO and asked them to look at it, caught a flight home, went back and picked it up, and they basically said we couldn't find anything, and then it worked. But anyway, I sent it into Garmin, and they found this issue. It was some kind of an intermittent fault, but something needed to be changed. It was quite a while ago.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience, Oliver. Bruno, when you find your ground speed, should you adjust power to get back to your target ground speed using corresponding IAS, or should you keep the same RPM specified in the performance table?
So that is an interesting question because both sides have a drawback. So in terms of timing, the easiest would be just to let's say you find yourself to be a little bit slower, like we found when I was flying over Bodega Bay. If you add RPM, basically, you increase you will catch up with the time. However, you will consume more gas. Now the question is, are you time constrained or are you gas constrained, or neither of them? If you keep the same performance of your airplane, now you know your fuel consumption per hour, but you know you're going to be a little late, so you're going to consume still a little bit more than anticipated, maybe because the winds have shifted. So now it's a balance between the two. One of the things that both Oliver and Kelly just mentioned right now is that doing math in the cockpit is not more difficult than doing it at home. However, pilots become pretty dumb when they start to do math in the cockpit for whatever reason. And in general, I would try just to avoid doing fancy math in the cockpit unless you have one of those E6B that you can turn the wheel, because you're going to make calculation errors very quickly, unless you have round numbers like I chose today, like 60, 90, and 120. So try to carry a little bit more fuel, and then adjust your speed would be my recommendation in general. But you have to also see with what is happening on how you will organize for that.
Yeah. And do you find the portable GPS solutions fail more often?
So I carry 2 portable GPS with me when I fly I mean 3, I guess. One is my cell phone, but usually it's in my pocket. 2 is my iPad, just to have a map right in front of me. And in my flight bag, I have an old Garmin 96C. The Garmin 96C, I'm not sure how it was built, but definitely like a tank. The battery lasts forever, and it never fails. And I would say that it's just about as reliable as the Garmin 430 that we have in our panel. I have seen GPS failing in the panel, like some GNX 255, but those were VFR GPS, so I don't consider them to be real GPS. But iPads are known just to fail because of heat. So if you're counting on your iPad just to work throughout your flight, in California, for example, in the summer days, and in the bubble canopy, on top of it, if you fly an airplane with bubble canopies, I would not count on that. Several airplanes that I fly that have bubble canopies, I can tell you that just after takeoff, once I know where we are going, the iPad goes under the seat and is basically turned off, so that it doesn't generate more heat, and I will just pull it out when I need it, and if I need it. So that is my experience.
After all the Starlink satellites are fully nominal, will you need dead reckoning?
Well, everything that requires electronics has a chance to fail. Dead reckoning just works on the watch. If you have even a mechanical watch from your great-grandparents, it will still works. You need a compass that you can probably buy at the $1 shop down the street, and you would be pretty damn close already with your navigation. Now, maybe not with a compass at $1 from the Dollar Tree store, maybe not within half a mile, after 10 minutes, but you still have an idea where you are going. So I don't see, for example, in airplanes, DFA changing the requirement of having a magnetic compass, for example, and most pilots, they carry their watch with them just so they can navigate just in case.
Yeah. Are Android tablets more reliable regarding heat compared to iPads? I
do not know. I have one Android tablet that is here. This one has never failed because of heat, but I haven't flown with it as much. So I would say I have a backup plan that use a complete different systems. You can have two tablets and keep one, in the shade and all that. That would help. But that's part of flight planning for backup.
And which mountain is in the background?
That is Mount Hood from White Salmon.
So Bob was correct. Yeah, if there are any more questions, just put them in the chat. We'll wait. Oh, so for the wings credit, do you have to have started flight training?
Good question. For it to count, the answer is yes. But you can still create your account on the FASafety.gov account, and I will still give you the credit. If you become a student pilot, by then, the credit will count for you.
Yeah. Let's just wait another minute for any more questions.
Well, I guess there are no more questions.
Yeah.
So time for the social, I guess.
Yeah. So thank you for taking the time out, Bruno, for an amazing presentation. And to everyone else, thank you all for joining. EA, we have many opportunities available for people of all ages to avail. And these include scholarships, building planes, and mentoring. So please come to our chapter meeting and social right after this presentation to learn more. Lastly, to keep updated with Young Aviators, follow our Instagram at YoungAviators1 and please share with anyone interested. Now we'll take a 2-minute break and then start the chapter meeting and social.